I am compelled to make a statement this evening, having met with several librarians from the state of Vermont yesterday, and they educated me as to what the President has in mind, not only for the libraries in the state of Vermont, but for the libraries throughout this country. And I agree very much with the gentleman from New York as to the horrendous impact that these proposed cuts are going to have. And I rise in strong opposition to the President's proposal to decimate the Department of Education's funding for libraries. Shortly after the First Lady launched the quote-unquote Year of the Lifetime Reader, end of quote, campaign, the man who would have the American people think of him as the education president cut federal support for the Library Services and Construction Act by 75%. Ironically, at the same time, the White House has announced a conference on library and information services. President Bush is quoted as saying that, quote, improving the nation's library and information services may be one of the best investments we make in our campaign to end illiteracy, end of quote, that we need to, quote, ensure that our nation's libraries continue to serve as a valuable source of knowledge and training, end of quote, that we, quote, must meet the information needs of all of our citizens, especially minorities, the elderly, disadvantaged young people, and persons living in rural areas, end of quote. This at the same time as he is cutting federal aid for libraries through LSCA from $143 million to $35 million in his budget proposal. The impact of a cut of this magnitude would be enormous on the public library system. In my state of Vermont, a rural state, we are very dependent on the small amount of federal aid we receive for libraries. Let me give you just a few examples. LSCA Title I provides $211,000 for regional libraries, which provide services to the 42 towns which have no local library, as well as supplemental book collections to 196 small rural libraries and consulting services continuing education across the state. LSCA Title II provides $136,000 in matching funds for renovation, construction, and technology enhancement. In Vermont, none of these funds are used for administration. LSCA Title III provides an 800 line connecting libraries around the state to a computerized database itself funded by the state. Our state librarian, Patricia Klink, summed up the effect of the proposed cuts quite clearly, quote, in a rural environment, LSCA funding means the difference between access and isolation, end of quote. Not only is the 75% cut devastating to our public libraries, the fact is that the remaining $35 million for literacy is not specifically designated and would become part of the state block grant program, which includes funds for welfare, human services, and education. Library services would, in all likelihood, not fare well in competition with more immediately obvious pressing needs such as hunger and housing, especially in these difficult economic times. Mr. Speaker, we must not allow these cuts to go through. We must speak out on the specific impacts of these and the many other cuts being quietly implemented while non-consequential actions are used in a shell game to divert media attention from the real issues. In his letter accompanying the announcement of the White House Conference on Library and Information Services, President Bush writes, quote, our ability to stay ahead depends in large part on our ability to stay informed, end of quote. I couldn't agree more. The problem is that when the United States government says one thing and does another, it is difficult for the American people to do that. And I thank the gentleman from New York for agreeing to allow me to speak.